Welcome to another episode of Make Mental Health Matter. Having a couple technical difficulties today, but that's what happens when you're live. If this is your first time watching, my name is Kelli Melissa Reinhart. I am your host, and I am super excited for my guest today, as I am with all my guests. But if this happens to be your first time watching, please make sure you click down the subscribe button if you're watching it on YouTube, or if you're watching it on any of the streaming platforms, add into your watch or wish list, depending on where you're watching it. But either way, make sure that you follow along so that you don't miss another episode, because every single guest that I bring on is just incredible. And again, I am super excited for my guest today, because she also happens to be my sister and somebody who I've been looking up to my whole life, literally and figuratively, but also has been in the mental health or the health space for a really, really, really long time. We'll talk more about that. So without further ado, I am going to bring up my sister, Michaela. Thank you. It sounds so weird when I say Kayla. Kayla. I know.
Yeah,
Thank you for joining me. I appreciate it.
absolutely.
Yeah, so I guess I should explain to those that are watching, and you're like, what are you talking about? So my whole life, I called my sister Kayla, and her name is Michaela. And I remember when the first time somebody, I think it was mom, she said Michaela, and I was like, who the heck is that? Because I only had called you Kayla. So, but in professional space, you go by Michaela. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do specifically.
Well, I work in the maternal child health space. I've been in this space for over 20 years. I started my career as a childbirth educator. I was a birth doula for a while. I have held positions as faculty, teaching others how to be lactation educators, how to be childbirth educators. I've held numerous board positions on local breastfeeding and lactation organizations. But my main gig is I'm a board certified lactation consultant. I have a private practice that I work at 4 days a week. And then the fifth day, I work for a local pediatrician doing lactation for them. They have a whole lactation program at the pediatric office. So that's what I'm doing most of the time. My office is located in Chandler, Arizona. So I'm down here where the sun shines all the time.
Yeah, warm. It's cold today in Colorado, so I'm
It's warm
jealous.
here.
So I know specifically for me, I didn't realize how valuable a lactation consultant really truly was until I had my son. And you being here when Rylan was born was extremely helpful. One, because you're my sister, but two, because I had a lot of challenges that happened. So can you just talk about, so those people that don't really understand the value of having a lactation consultant, an IBCLC, a breastfeeding coach, whatever you want to call it, can you just explain a little bit more, like why it is so valuable to have somebody like you by your side?
Well, everybody is usually very focused on, the labor and the birth, and that kind of consumes most, birthing people's thoughts throughout the pregnancy. But not everybody's thinking about how they're going to feed their baby. And, things have changed over the years. I mean, just in over the 20 years that I've been doing this, things have definitely changed. They've changed since I had my kid. Feeding a baby hasn't really changed that much, but the recommendations and the research and everything that's been done has definitely changed. And so, a lactation consultant has gone through some rigorous requirements to become, be eligible to sit for the exam. There's several different professionals in the lactation space. There's certified lactation educators, certified breastfeeding counselors, those, just a couple, but international board certified lactation consultant, IBCLC, is the person who is responsible for the clinical management of lactation. So, even if, parents aren't having any problems and breastfeeding is going beautifully, I still recommend that they see somebody, because there's always little tips and tricks that we can give to our families to just make that journey smoother for them. And I have, families in my office every single day that are like, nobody told me that the breastfeeding was going to be this hard. Nobody told me that, this was going to consume every bit of my time. Babies consume all of your time. It doesn't really matter how you're feeding them. They consume a lot of time. But, that breastfeeding piece is really important for a lot of families, and they want to be successful at it. And nowadays, resources are definitely more accessible than they were when I had my kids. My oldest is 30 years old. And back when I had him, I didn't even know that lactation visits were something you could have outpatient. I saw the lactation consultant in the hospital, and beyond that, I was kind of on my own. I didn't really know what was going on. And, back then I didn't do what I do now. So obviously I have a lot more knowledge now, and, going through my own experiences with my kids, we had challenging births and challenging feeding, and, you name it, I had the challenge. And so, part of my mission is to help those families that are struggling. Even if they think they're not struggling, there's still things that they can learn for sure. And, I cover all kinds of topics. There's a common misperception about what lactation consultants do, that we're all, crazy breastfeeder promoters, and, breastfeeding is the only way, and, that kind of stuff. And, fortunately, that's not true. I'll be the first to recommend to a family if that baby needs to be supplemented or anything like that, to make sure that, the breastfeeding parent and baby get to, their goals.
Yeah, I think that is, a big thing to talk about, is that most people, if you are struggling, you have a good intention to go in and breastfeed for the year, 2 years, whatever, however long they recommend, right, depending on where you live in the world. But sometimes it can get really, really hard. And if your baby's not eating, it's not going to be that you're going to this professional that's like, you can only breastfeed, blah, blah, blah. Like, the whole point is to get nutrition and nourishment to the baby in whatever form it can be. So I'm glad you pointed that out also.
Yeah. Yeah. Human milk is the biological norm for a human baby. And so, I want to promote that wherever we can. I also am very sensitive to, the families that choose to formula feed. I can still teach you how to, give a bottle properly, how to mix formula properly, all of those types of things. And, I feel like I'm the lactation consultant that kind of lives in the real world and know that, one size doesn't fit every family, for sure. And, you could come and sit in my office for a day, and you'd be amazed how different but similar their stories are. They're all, sleep deprived and postpartum and everything that goes along with having a new baby in the house. But to have, somebody there to kind of just cheer them on and instill the confidence that they need is a big part of what I do. And I think probably 90% of my job is just counseling. The other 10% is the clinical management of breastfeeding. But, these families have just gone through a big life-changing event, and there's a lot going on, emotionally and physically.
Yeah, I mean, of course, Ryland's now 8 years old, so it feels like forever ago since I was in that position, but I still remember when he was little, and there were moments that I was just like, I can't do this. I can't do this. And then I'd call you and I'd be like, I don't know what I'm doing. Help me. And then you'd calm me down and like lead me through what I needed to do. And having that support was huge for me. And it wouldn't have been something that I potentially would have even looked into or considered at the time had you not been my sister and helping me through. And I just honestly probably would have been one of those people that was like, I'm gonna suck it up and get through it and work through what I have to and figure it out. And maybe this isn't right for me. I'm just gonna change over to formula, right? Like that probably would have been my process that I would have went through. But having somebody like you by your side to be able to help you through, because it's hard enough. I mean, add all these things on top of it, and then you add not sleeping, and then it's like this constant of adding on top of and adding on top of and adding on top of. And as a new mom, at least for me, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how it was going to work, how long I was going to do it for. And I think that even now, you talked about resources. There's a lot more resources that are available to moms in general that weren't necessarily back in the day. But also, we have now this, well, I don't know if it still is, but the shortage of formula on top of everything else that we're trying to accomplish as a mom and as a parent. And so there even adds more levels to needing somebody that's like by your side that can help support you through whatever you're going through.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I remember back when I had my kids, breastfeeding went fairly well with my older one. It went horribly with my second one, horribly. And I didn't understand why it was going horribly because it went so well the first time. So but I had a totally different kid that had, other things going on. And so I see, moms with, their third and fourth and fifth kid, and they're like, nothing was wrong, with the first ones. But I'm like, well, it's a different kid. And you get something new with each one. I also recommend that families do their research before they have their baby. I see families all the time for prenatal visits. So we can talk about what to expect, how to get off to the best start, pitfalls that can happen in a hospital setting, especially. Something that most families are surprised to learn is that their pediatrician, their OBGYN, their midwife, their nurse, none of them have had any lactation education. Zero. And families are looking to their pediatricians, to, their care providers for advice, for, guidance. And they're not getting very good guidance or recommendations. I hear it every single day. My pediatrician said this and this and this, and it's like from left field. It's just like, where did that come from? I have no idea what you're talking about. Or they're very antiquated recommendations, or they have their own bias from their own breastfeeding experience. So there's a lot going on. And really, we are the only ones that are lactation experts in, the healthcare field. So, a lot of them have taken it upon themselves to get further educated in it. And I applaud those providers because it is in their best interest. If they're working with new families and babies, they really, it should be required. Honestly, it should be required, but it's not. And every physician, every person that I talk to, they're like, no, we didn't get any training. We don't know anything about lactation. So it's surprising to families that they're not going to get that support where they think they're going to get it.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of goes across the board in even in like the mental health space where I'm at. Is there's so many different people that specialize in so many different things, but nobody necessarily specializes in all of them, or specifically, like you were saying, lactation. So yeah, I think that having this conversation is really important, because when you don't know, you don't know where to go or how to get the resources, and having somebody like you especially come onto the show and share, like, this is a thing, this is a real thing, and it can affect mothers, parents, the whole family's mental health also. When you think about, and I know that we were going to talk about perinatal mental health, in addition to breastfeeding and lactation, but I think that having somebody that can help you before, during, and after the birth of your child, because I know you also teach birthing classes, and that's something, or baby classes, baby preparedness classes. Because I took one myself, and I was like, I mean, you think it's like simple, put on a diaper, right? But like when you really go into it, there's so much more. There's just a lot of layers that people don't think about until you're like in the thick of it all.
Right, right. Yeah. And, you know, when I'm seeing these families, you know, and talking about that perinatal mental health piece, you know, I have some advanced training in perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. And I'm often kind of the first person that might be identifying that something is going on, because, you know, there's still, unfortunately, as you know, Kelli, in the mental health world, there's a stigma attached to it, and especially for new parents, because it's supposed to be this happy, joyous time, and that's what everybody thinks it should be. But for a lot of families, it's not that way at all. It's like one of the worst times of their life. And you know, we know that, you know, perinatal mental health during the pregnancy. I mean, moms that are exposed to high levels of chronic stress during their pregnancies, it can literally change the way the baby's DNA expresses itself. And so we're creating generational mental health disorders because of, you know, everything that we're exposed to. And, you know, I'm not saying that a little stress here and there is going to ruin anything. That's normal. That's how we learn to be resilient, is by, you know, those stressful situations. But when it's at a chronic high level all the time, that's when we run into problems. And, you know, I've had so many moms sit in my office, or, you know, I used to do home visits. I would go see them in their homes, just sit and cry and cry. And oftentimes their partners are kind of like wide-eyed, like, what is going on? And they don't always even know when something's going on. But when you give that parent a space to express themselves and you ask the right questions, that's really important, is to ask the right questions. Because if you just say to a new parent, hey, how are you feeling? What do you think the response is going to be? I'm fine. I'm fine, because that's what everybody expects you to say, right? Or, you know, I'm a little tired, but I'm doing okay, or, you know, something like that. But, you know, the questions that I like to ask are how you're doing emotionally. Like, are you feeling overwhelmed? Are you feeling, you know, like a bad mom? Are you feeling, you know, like this was a mistake? Or, you know, and moms will have all of these thoughts, and they are horrible to have, you know, and so then they beat themselves up even more about it, because they're like, why am I feeling this way when all I've wanted is this baby? I have this baby now. All my dreams should be coming true, but I'm not feeling that way. And so it's really, you know, something that is close and near and dear to my heart, you know, just the perinatal mental health piece, because, you know, I had postpartum depression with both my kids. And with my first one, it was pretty severe. Now, you know, just just so everybody knows, perinatal means pregnancy and postpartum goes up to a year after birth. So even though stuff doesn't show up, in that first couple weeks, doesn't mean it's not going to show up later. And so we consider that whole first year part of that postpartum perinatal period. And we have perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. So most people are familiar with postpartum depression. That's what we hear in the news. That's what we see everywhere is postpartum depression. But there's so much more to it. And under that perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, or what we call PMADs, is a variety of mental health problems. So we have depression, we have anxiety, we have OCD, we have PTSD, and we have bipolar mood disorders. And then on the far end of the spectrum, we have psychosis. Mm-hmm. So there's this misconception in our society that if you have postpartum depression, you must want to kill your baby. Like that's, oh my gosh, she has postpartum depression. We're all going to freak out now. That's far from the truth, okay? Postpartum psychosis is extremely rare. 1 to 2 in 1,000 women will have a psychotic episode after birth. It typically happens in the first 2 weeks after birth, but it can happen again anytime in that first year. And psychosis is very different than depression or anxiety or OCD or any of those other mood disorders, because when somebody is having a psychotic break, their reality is different than the rest of the world. And what they see and feel and believe is very, very real to them. And the stories that I've heard from other professionals that have dealt with a psychotic parent is that they're very calm. When you say the word psychosis or psychotic, you think of, whoa, somebody crazy running around like what, you see in the movies or something like that. But they're typically very calm, very collected. I talked to a physician friend of mine the other day, and she was telling me about a woman that she said it was the only time in her career that she had to send a mom to the hospital because she was having a psychotic episode. And she was very matter of fact. And she said, voices are telling me that there's a demon in my baby, that, all of these, like what we would say, crazy things, crazy thoughts, right? But it was very real to her. And, so obviously in those situations, that's an emergency situation. We need to call 911 or we need to get her to the hospital immediately. The percentage of moms that actually follow through with harming themselves or harming their babies is actually very low, like 4 to 5% of psychotic episodes will result in a death. So that's good news, that it's not very high, but it's still something to be aware of. And symptoms of depression, I'm sure everybody's familiar with those, symptoms of anxiety. But in a postpartum setting or a perinatal setting, it can look different, like hypervigilance about the baby, not letting anybody else touch the baby or do anything with the baby. You're the only one that can do it. And then when we get into the OCD part of it, a lot of moms will have what are called intrusive thoughts. And an intrusive thought is something that's very disturbing to her. She knows it's wrong. She knows it's not something that she wants to do, but it usually involves harming herself or harming her baby or something happening to the baby. And so they get really hypervigilant and they don't want to tell anybody that they're having these thoughts, because then they're going to be labeled as, you're crazy, or, take them to the hospital, or, all of these things. The difference between a mom that's having intrusive thoughts and a mom that's in a psychotic episode is the mom with intrusive thoughts, she knows it's wrong. She has no intention of acting on any of those thoughts. They're still very disturbing, but the mom that's having a psychotic episode, it's very real and could happen. So, there's definitely a difference. And all of these disorders are not super common, but the depression and the anxiety piece is probably what I see most of the time in my practice. And because it's more common, 15 to 20% of new moms will have some kind of depression or anxiety. The OCD and that kind of stuff is more like 3 to 5%. So much lower on those, bigger ends of the spectrum, but something to be aware of. And depression is the number one complication of pregnancy, postpartum depression. So it's something that I like to make sure families are aware of. It's not a topic that anybody likes to talk about. It's not a topic that everybody's excited to talk about. And, when I was teaching childbirth classes, I devoted a lot of time to PMADS because it's important. And I've had moms later that came up to me at, breastfeeding support groups, and they're like, remember when we were in our class and you talked about those intrusive thoughts? And I said, yeah. She's like, well, I think I'm having them. And I'm like, okay, well, I was really proud of her for acknowledging it and coming to try and get help. And so where do people go for help? There's tons of resources now. I mean, 30 years ago, it was get over it and move on. And I didn't have any treatment. And I did kind of just have to get over it and move on. But guess what? Your body doesn't get over trauma. Right, Kelli?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, I know that one very well.
Yeah.
And I love that so much of this is really important to talk about, and we don't talk about it enough. So we're going to go to a quick sponsored break. But once we get back, I want to talk more about specifically what to be on the lookout for. Like, what are those signs and the symptoms that people should be watching, and where are those resources? So once we get back from this quick sponsored break, we'll chat about those.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Amy Joy, and I'm the host of Get Your Shit Together Live with Amy Joy. And you can catch me every Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific on the amazing Trajectory channel right here on E360 TV.
And like that, we're back. If you just happen to be joining us, thank you for first time watching, please make sure if you're watching this on YouTube that you click down the subscribe button. If you are watching this on any of the streaming platforms, make sure you add this into your watch wish list, whatever you call it. But I am here with my sister, Michaela, and we have been talking about really perinatal mental health, but also how important it is to have an IBCLC or a lactation consultant when you have a baby, as a new mom, a not new mom, however many babies you might have. But it's so important to have somebody by your side to be able to help you through the journey of childbirth, because it is not easy by any means. And when people talk about that it's all like puppies and rainbows, I promise you it is not, because it is hard. It is truly, truly hard to have another human, and being able to feed them and take care of them and provide for them. And I know as you were talking earlier, I thought about, there were moments that I at points, because my son had like bit down and I was like, I'm gonna punch my baby. Like, that's how I felt at some moments. And I had those thoughts that came up, like, I can't do this. Like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Right. And as moms in general, I think we all have these thoughts, but like you even said earlier, is that we don't often talk about them because we don't want anybody to label us crazy or take away our kids, right? Like we have these worries that if we tell people how we're really truly feeling as a mom or even as a dad, right? Like they don't go through the whole 9 months and then all of a sudden they have this baby and they're supposed to be expected to know what to do with it, right? And so we don't have these conversations enough. And then we keep them all to ourselves, which ultimately creates mental health challenges. Like you can have mental health challenges come up, like depression, anxiety. You talked about OCD, and there's bipolar, and then on the extreme, there's psychosis, which I actually brought it up on my last show. When I was in college, I had an abnormal psychology class too. We had a woman come in that she talked about having postpartum psychosis. She had postpartum depression with her first, got through that, decided they weren't going to have another kid, but then 5 years later they were like, oh, let's try it again, had another, and she, instead of just depression, it actually went into psychosis. And unfortunately she killed both of her babies. And she really, the experience, she said, now she goes around and tells people all about it, but it was, she's like, I just wanted to sleep. Like I just wanted everybody to go to sleep. And she had been in and out of mental facilities. This was like way back in the day, but 3 different mental health facilities that never talk to each other. And that's the other challenge. I hope that it has gotten better in now, but it's still this real thing that as a parent, as a mom, we don't have these conversations, and we need to make it okay to say whatever is coming up on our minds and be able to have somebody there like you that can really give them that space. Like you said earlier, you can give them the space to just cry, because sometimes that's what you need, is like you need to be able to say everything that's in your brain and be able to cry and it be okay. Really be in a safe space that's not, you're not going to be judged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the, feeling like you're going to be judged part is huge as a parent, even more so than, if you weren't a parent and you had depression and anxiety symptoms. I think that's one piece of it, and there's still that little bit of stigma, but we've made great strides in the mental health arena, and it's much more acceptable to reach out for help. But as a mom, there is, I think, even more of a stigma with the mental health piece because, you just had a baby, you're supposed to be happy. And, it's just not that way for a lot. And, I don't want to just talk about the mom piece of it. Men are at risk for postpartum depression as well. 1 in 10 men will have postpartum depression. And depression usually exhibits itself differently in men than it does in women. And so, just looking for symptoms. I had a client one time, her husband had severe postpartum depression and wanted to hurt the baby. So, he got treatment, got through it. They had another baby. Everybody was fine, but that's the thing, is that everybody needs to know is that all of these disorders are 100% treatable. They're all fixable stuff. And a lot of moms, especially when they're breastfeeding, will avoid seeking treatment because they're afraid they're going to get put on some medication that would make them, have to stop their breastfeeding journey, which is absolutely not true. There are many, many, many medications that are compatible with breastfeeding. And that's why it's also important to, have a lactation consultant in your back pocket, because we have that resource. We can look those things up. We can look up those medications and tell them if they're safe or not. And you'd be surprised how many are really actually very safe. And so that's, should it be a deterrent for breastfeeding moms that they're just going to put me on a pill and I don't want to do that. But, I always tell them too, it's not forever usually. It's kind of like, let's get through this little piece, and then, we kind of move on from there. And so, the symptoms that we're looking for, anger, irritability, lack of interest in the baby. They don't feel like they're bonding with their baby. I hear that a lot. I don't feel like I'm bonding with my baby. Appetite changes. In my experience, it's been that they're not eating at all. Usually, they have the opportunity to sleep and they still can't sleep. So a new parent should be able to sleep at the drop of a hat because they're so sleep deprived, but they have the opportunity to sleep and they still can't sleep, or they have these racing thoughts that won't stop. Obviously crying, sadness, feelings of guilt, shame, incompetence. I'm not cut out to be a mother. Why did we do this? All of those kinds of things. And then, on the anxiety side of things, we're looking for constant worry, feeling that something bad is going to happen, racing thoughts. Again, sleep and appetite can be affected, inability to sit still. They might even have physical symptoms, just like anybody else with anxiety. Like, I've heard people have anxiety attacks that mimic a cardiac arrest. And so we might see, dizziness, hot flashes, nausea, those types of things happening too. But a lot of times they just have this hypervigilance about the baby. And, I see it so much in my practice. And I'm to the point now where I've been doing this long enough that when a mom, just the way she starts talking and the way that she's handling herself and handling her baby kind of cues me that I need to screen her. And so there's, 2 validated screening tools that we typically use to screen. And the one I use is a simple 10 questionnaire. And you can kind of see a glimpse into, what might be going on and give the appropriate resources where it's needed. And so, here in Arizona, we have lots of great resources. I know you do in Colorado too. My favorite resource is Postpartum Support International. They have the biggest presence. Their website is postpartum.net. There you can find help in your specific state. You can find all of the symptoms that we've been talking about. There's just a plethora of information on that website. And there's helplines that you can call or text. So, a lot of people don't feel like they want to call somebody and to actually talk to somebody. And so they might feel more comfortable texting, and they can do that too with the national helpline.
That's awesome. Just having those resources, I think, is really important. And you said it's
postpartum.net. Yeah.
Let's see if I can spell it. Postpartum.net, because I can put it down at the bottom. If I spell it wrong.
And I can give you the national helpline phone number if you want to post that.
Postpartum. Did I spell that right?
Yes, you did.
Postpartum. Yay. Okay. So the resource is down at the bottom, postpartum.net. That is a great resource to be able to have. And we can always post them in the show comments too. But a lot of what we're talking about really are also signs and symptoms that we should be watching for mental health challenges in general, that we also have to think about. With like after birth, it's mainly that postpartum time, again, you said right after birth up until a year. And I know that there are lots of organizations. There's actually one here in Colorado who is one of my friends, that they give mothers, or they're creating this program that gives mothers wraparound support for a whole year. It's like pairing them up with another mom to be able to give them support, because we have lost so many moms, whether it's to suicide and or, psychosis. So there's lots of really amazing organizations, but I think like this is a conversation that we need to have. These are the things that people need to know and understand, and there are people that are out there that can help you pre-birth, during birth, and post-birth. And we just really have to get access to the information, know what resources are out there, know that you can have these conversations, and that you're not going to get thrown into a mental health facility, or you're not going to have your baby taken away. This is normal. It's normal. It's not abnormal to have these type of thoughts. What is abnormal is acting on those thoughts. So before you act on the thoughts that might be coming up, that's when you really need to seek out help. And Michaela is a great resource. Also, anything in Arizona, I can always reach out to her and ask her for you, which is great. Anything in Colorado, I can get for anybody here. But I also am just curious, like, how overall can moms or parents, because again, we're not just talking about moms, we're talking about parents as a whole. How can this information, like, how can they really take this information and go be successful with it? I don't know, that's the question that pops into my head.
Well, I think awareness is, huge. And, these families need to know that it's not their fault. There's so much mom guilt about everything. If you're a mom, there's guilt about everything. And so, we're usually the last ones to take care of ourselves. And so it's important to you can set the stage even before, because the people that are at highest risk for perinatal mood and anxiety disorders are, one, if you have a history of any mental health problems, that does put you in a higher risk category. The moms that don't have support. And so the moms that don't have support, the moms that are, very, low economic status. There's a lot of things that can be done to help kind of support that mom in her postpartum journey. And, postpartum doulas are a great resource, because they're not just birth doulas, there's postpartum doulas too, and they can be really helpful with that kind of stuff. And, talking about it with your partner and making sure that your partner is aware of the signs and symptoms, because they're not always kind of with it. But I always tell the partners, I'm like, do you know when she's mad and when she's happy? And they're like, yeah, we know. I'm like, you're probably going to be the first one to, kind of notice that something's a little off. And so, like I mentioned earlier, the questions we want to ask is, how are you doing emotionally? Do you feel like you're managing things well? Are you feeling overwhelmed? Those types of things. I mean, I remember when it was time for my husband to go back to work with my second one. I mean, I was like in panic mode. I'm like, I can't do this by myself. And I was just a hot mess, and just to kind of normalize this a little bit too, is that the first 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks after birth, everybody's a hot mess. Everybody feels, all of the feels. And we don't consider that postpartum depression. If it goes beyond 2 to 3 weeks postpartum, then we might be onto something a little more serious. But having all of those feelings in the first 2 to 3 weeks, completely normal. And about 80% of moms will have what's called the baby blues. And that's what we're describing in those first 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's just great information to know too, is that's normal, right? And then going beyond that is really when you need to search out help, whether that is finding a coach or a mentor, or going to your physician, so they can refer to somebody, an IBCLC, perinatal coach, or whomever might be in that space, right? Or reach out to me and I can get you connected with Kayla in Arizona, or wherever you might be. I'm sure we can find somebody if you're needing help and resources. But I do also, what else popped into my head is, because you were talking about it is normal, right? Like I know even after my son's birth, I did not connect with him because I was in so much pain that I was like, oh my gosh, one, because he came sunny side up and he was not coming out the right way and it hurt so bad. And then I wasn't really connecting and I felt really horrible about that. But then you go even further and you start talking about like this generational type trauma that when you have trauma while they're like pre-birth, that's whatever. That's what I'm going with. When you are pregnant with the baby, like if you have high elevated levels of stress, that can cause a lot of challenges for the baby themselves. And I think that we're becoming more aware of that. So trying to have less stress during your pregnancy is really great. But then also after birth, and I don't think it just necessarily stops after a year, right? Like there's still guilt or things that come up. So if there is anything that comes up even after a year, definitely or highly recommend that you talk to somebody, you search out the help, and ask the questions, right? Like I talk about this a lot too, is we've got to ask the right questions. It's not just simply, hey, how are you doing today? I'm fine, right? We have those automatic responses. So ask the right questions. And I think that you gave really great specific questions that can be asked. And those of us that are closest to the mom, to the dads, we're the ones that really need to pay attention to those changes and notice what's happening and then ultimately get them to the help that they need, because we don't want it to shift into that psychosis, which it can potentially. So just a lot of things to consider, things to think about.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that we didn't get to that you want to share, or maybe any other tools that you wanted to provide to the audience?
Well, I would say, if you yourself are pregnant or trying to get pregnant, or you have somebody in your life that is pregnant, encourage them to kind of set up a good support network before they have their baby. Consider seeing a lactation consultant before you have the baby. Maybe looking into a doula, a birth or postpartum doula. Making sure that we're kind of setting ourselves up for success can make a huge difference. And making sure that your partner kind of knows what to expect. Because I think a lot of times, especially our male partners, just don't know what to do. And, a new mom's going to cry a lot. And I remember my husband just looking at me like I had two heads because I was just like sobbing inconsolably. And, there was this one time where my mom just took me and she patted me on the back and she's like, it's going to be okay. And I was like ugly crying. And that was like all I needed. That's all I needed, was some permission to just cry and let it out. And so I often will tell partners that, if she's crying, do not ask her what's wrong. That's like the wrong question to ask. You want to say, I'm sorry you're feeling sad right now. Is there anything I can do to help you? If she can identify something, you're going to go do that. But if she can't identify anything, you're just going to take her in your arms. You're going to love on her. You're going to tell her it's okay, cry as long as she needs to, that you're there for her. And you'd be amazed what that will do for another person.
Yeah, I think that goes just across the board with humans in general,
Yeah,
right? But
mm-hmm.
but more specifically, when after birth, that's sometimes what a mom or a parent needs to have happen, is just have somebody that notices and actually cares and allows you that safe space to not be judged. So I love this conversation. And so tell the audience, if they want to find you, how can they do that?
Well, my website is swlactation.com. Look at you, already got it up there. You're so fancy. You can find me on my website. My phone number is listed there. My email is Michaela. That's Michaela at swlactation.com. You can email me if you need resources, if you need just a sounding board, I mean, I'm happy to do that. Like I said, this is a topic that, I definitely got more education in than the average lactation consultant because it is so near and dear to my heart. And I want to make sure that families are getting the help that they need.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have been wanting to bring my sister on for so long, and she finally got scheduled.
I finally did
it. Finally, yay. Thank you so much for joining me and being my guest, because I knew that this conversation was really important to have. So I greatly appreciate you joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yay. All right, y'all. That was another amazing episode of Make Mental Health Matter. I'm going to drop these one more time. So this was the postpartum.net that has a whole bunch of resources. And then here is my sister's website. I am truly blessed to have my sister be able to come on today and share the space with me. I think this is an incredible conversation that needs to be had more often because, again, as moms, as parents, we have these thoughts. And honestly, like, we all have those thoughts. Maybe not the same thoughts, but the experience through having a child, having another human, it can be freaking hard. It is not all rainbows and puppies and all those things. I mean, puppies are hard. Come on. When you have a puppy, they're almost as hard as having a baby. So asking the right questions, or more specific questions, to find out what's going on instead of just the general, hey, how are you doing, are great tools to have in your tool belt, and noticing the changes and giving that safe space for no judgment. So hopefully this was helpful for you. No matter what, make sure you join. Again, I will be going live this Wednesday at 7 p.m. So I go live every Monday at 11 a.m. Mountain Time and 7 p.m. on Wednesdays Mountain Time. So either way, join back and come see me for another episode. Drop any comments or questions that you might have into the comment section, and we'll get those answered. That's the cool part about being live, is you can ask questions too. But I will see you next time. Bye.